Hi, everyone. This is our first lecture on the text Landmarks in the Humanities by Gloria K. Fierro. And we are going to take a look at our first chapter titled Origins, the First Civilizations. So the book is going to take us kind of chronologically really over a lot of territory from 25,000 BC to 330 BC. You're going to be asked a series of questions in your reading assessments. So in your reading assessments, I'm always going to give you the first question: what was your favorite part of the chapter? Why did you find it interesting? Do not be brief on this, and make sure that you are giving me specific examples explaining what it is that you learned. So if you just mention something, I liked cave art, and you don't talk about anything else. You don't talk about maybe Chevi from the chapter or the image of the Hall of the Bulls in Lascaux Cave. Give specific places. I think it's smart to cite page numbers. And then you are writing essay style questions. So you are being graded on completing and each question is a point. So if you miss any one part of the question, you lose a point. So you want to make sure that you are over explaining. And when I say examples, that's plural. So what types of early religions are forming in our chapter? What belief systems are forming? How do the gods relate to the human world? These are general questions that you will find answers in. And what these questions are designed to do is to show that you are reading the entire chapter. So realize that that is the goal of the assignment. So our book starts on questions: how and why did life originate? What is our purpose on Earth? How might human beings survive the onset of flood, fire, drought, and other natural threats? How might they bring order to collective and communal life? Even before the dawn of writing, in the era known as prehistory, the earliest inhabitants of our planet must have asked such questions, for we know they made vigorous efforts to manipulate nature and to protect the members of their small and thriving communities, just as in our own time, prehistoric men and women devised technologies for survival strategies to protect the members of their communities. The answers and solutions come to us in the forms of artifacts they left behind. Their tools, their weapons, cave paintings, burial mounds, stone sanctuaries. More sophisticated evidence of early life comes to us in the first civilizations, born in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China. Ancient cities left written records of trade contracts, law codes, religious hymns and prayers, cast bronze artifacts, monumental tombs and temples, and in the Americas reveal some, but not all, of the hallmarks of these early civilizations, but we do find evidence as well over here. So we are looking, starting at prehistory in the Paleolithic world. So in the prehistory of the Paleolithic world, we are looking at things that are transmitted by humankind that we call culture. In prehistory, we are looking at Paleolithic culture here, the Old Stone Age, where people are making bone and stone tools. We look at the Upper Paleolithic, that is more near to our time, where it is somewhere between probably 100,000 years ago until now. In the Upper Paleolithic, we specifically look at about 40,000 years to now. So people 40,000 years ago were us, And I'm going to show you that when we have our discussion and we look at cave painting later. So modern humans are coming of age and leaving evidence that we are here. From tools, we're making art, and we are burying our dead with elaborate grave ceremonial artifacts. So we have ice ages that are occurring between 3 million and 10,000 years ago. And in the end of the Ice Age, hunter-gatherers are using fire to provide safety and warmth as a means for preparing food. They're burying their dead. We are basically tribal hunters and gatherers, and we have spread out from Central Africa to South Africa to West Africa to the Levant to Asia to Australia to Indonesia. And also, we will be looking at cave art from Europe, in France, and in Spain. So, in this Paleolithic world, one of the things that we find are wall paintings. Paintings that go back at least 40,000 years, painted in caves where the dampness or the lack of light and the unchanging atmosphere in the caves has allowed the burnt charcoal and other mediums that they've used in terms of putting soot on walls, basically. We have found magnificent image of animals like that huge woolly rhinoceros, female we know because they have longer horns, with the ears in perspective and that wonderful little mouth there, made about 30,000 years ago. Below that are the spotted horses of Pech Merle. In Pech Merle, we're seeing a rock, and the rock looks like the head of the horse. The artist did not chip away at this at all. Found it like this, used that as an imaginative springboard to then spread on the mane of the horse to blow dots out of a bone and create then the horse's bodies, the dorsal line, the belly, very thin legs, and then also to leave these hand stencils here, showing us that people made this and that it's like a tag today. It's kind of like a signature. So they are really showing us some extraordinary naturalism in their drawings. We see that here in these buffalo that were made about 15,000 years ago, made out of clay and put in a cave. They look like the animals. We're also finding tribal elements. We are finding totems. And we believe quite a lot of this is a shaman-based religion that revolves around a lot of these artifacts. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the discussion. So we find things like these stone sculptures going back 30,000 years. This Venus of Willendorf is about 4.5 inches tall. It was carved out of limestone. The belly button was in the stone. It was not carved. So you can imagine the ancient cutter seeing the belly button and carving from there. We have this voluptuous, plump woman with a pubic triangle, really nice knees, no feet, thin arms cradling her breasts. And then we don't see a face. We see either a headdress or hair wrapped around the head, very kind of mysterious. What was this used for? Well, we might find the answers in contemporary societies that practice shamanistic religions. Shamans are mediators between the natural and the spiritual world. They are healers. They are dancers and musicians, and they speak to the spirits. They speak to the spirit world. And perhaps some of this art relates to that spirit world. So we can find shamans and the way that nomadic people lived in very few places in our modern world today. One of them are the San people in Africa. They still practice shamanism. Native American tribes practice it too. And here is a video that shows you an example of a shaman doing their healing. And where did I have it? I think I gotta get that video up here for you. Let me see if this is it. I know where it's at. It's here. So I had this in 2 different lectures. This is the video that I wanted to show you. I was going to show it to you in the second lecture, but I actually want to show it now, just so we get an idea of what shamanism looks like. Imagine this going on 10,000, 20,000 years ago. Sitting around a campfire at night, losing sleep. Music, we got the rattles, we got drums, we got clapping, we got the human voice, early music. This is where it begins. At night, when we dance, we change. Same thing when you go to a club at night, or you go to a rave. You dance to change. So he is using the power of night, the power of music, to channel animal spirits. And we often find these shaman wearing the skins of animals, maybe the head of a buffalo. They are part animal, part human, and they are taking the spirits of the animals or of the night or of whatever gods that they are preaching to. And again, they are using this to change. They might be healing themselves physically, they might be healing themselves mentally or emotionally. This is what shamanism is. And when we look at that, we can begin to maybe understand who the shamans were in the Paleolithic world as well. So within the shaman people and within shamanism, we probably find the earliest types of religious impulses in us. And again, when you see the shaman wearing feathers, or here, we have an image cut into a cave 13,000 years ago that shows a human body and then the head of some sort of animal. So this impossible entity does not exist in the world, and all their other cave drawings are one-to-one relationships of things that exist. So probably this is not an image of the imagination, but more than likely an example of a shaman. And perhaps the reason they're going into these dark, cool caves is that they are trying to find some sort of spiritual growth or regeneration that happens within the hallucinogenic properties of making art in these darkened spaces. In the Neolithic world, first we have the Mesolithic, the giant stones in the New Stone Age. In the New Stone Age, we have become farmers, and we have figured out how to domesticate animals and to control their evolution for food and to use them as beasts of burden. We have rice and wheat and barley being grown in Asia, and we have maize and beans being grown in the Americas. They're raising goats and pigs and cattle and sheep for food. And we are also now building towns. We are becoming stable. When you wander, you don't have a lot of possessions on you because you're always moving. as you are staying and farming in certain places, you have to understand the cycles of the sun and the moon, the cycles of the seasons, when to plant, when to harvest, because you can't do it all year round and get crops to grow. At Göbekli Tepe, we're finding this really interesting place in Turkey where about 10,000 to maybe 6,000 years ago, people were going on top of this mountain and they were building these stone circles and then cutting stones and raising them upright that have mysterious images and animals in them. And we believe that Göbekli Tepe is probably some sort of place for religious ceremonies, even though, because it's before writing in prehistory, we don't know exactly what they are. So in the Neolithic culture, here is what a farming society might look like. You're having buildings that you're building to store grain and to live in. You are learning how to plant. You're also going to need warriors to protect this land if it's particularly fertile. You're domesticating animals to use to help you plow and animals to feed you rather than just hunting. And also we have mastered fibers. Rather than wearing animal pelts like we did in the previous age, we are able to weave clothes. We find pretty amazing civilizations in Çatalhöyük, where we have found artifacts from 7500 BC to 5700 BC. We have found ceramic artifacts. We are learning how to not just cut in stone, but to take clay and earth and to superheat it until it becomes glass-like and solid. And here we have this very powerful, large woman sitting on a throne of lions. We believe in the Neolithic era that the main gods were women because of the fertility implications of women and the idea of farming and the idea of fertility. Çatalhöyük is a community with houses built right on top and next to houses, and that to enter these buildings, you would have to climb up the walls, walk along the roofs, and then enter through ladders. We have found artifacts such as human heads that have plaster put on them and stones in them, and probably ancestors that were kept in houses for religious reasons. We have found early paintings that maybe might be one of the earliest maps ever made at Çatalhöyük. In places like Skara in Scotland, we also find Neolithic stone settlements. We find the evidences of them, not from the roofs that would have been thatched, but from the stone that they had cut in to keep them warm, cut into the ground for insulation. Also in Britain, we find Stonehenge, a mysterious place to say the least. These stone circles we find in a number of different places in the world. This is a large one with extremely large posts and lintels that have been cut and put in circles, and we believe this is a religious farming society, and that what we're seeing here are probably stones put in various places that when the sun goes through them, that might be indicative of perhaps the solstices. The birth of civilization as we get into the writing civilizations in the Bronze Age, 3300 BC to 1200 BC. So in the Bronze Age, we have figured out how to do metallurgy, to not just make bone and cut bone and stone, but how to form tools by superheating metals and by letting those metals dry and forming them into tools and into weapons. In the Bronze Age, this is where Mesopotamia comes alive. So in Mesopotamia, between the Euphrates and the Tigris, we get cities like Ur and Babylon, Uruk and Sumer. These cities at various times will dominate culturally the Fertile Crescent. And as the rivers move, the cities will move with them at various times. They have invented the earliest forms of writing in cuneiform. In cuneiform, they are using, let me see if I have a cuneiform here. Don't. I have this in a supplemental lecture on writing that you can take a look at. So they have created wedge-shaped pictogrammic forms for writing. In Egypt, they have created hieroglyphs around 3000, and from the writing that they are putting on walls, architecture, and in clay tablets, we have been able to decipher the writing, and we know quite a bit about these civilizations. They are making large cities with ziggurats in them. In Ur, we are seeing from the Sumerians, we have a loose group of city-states that is the home to earliest bronze technology, the first wheeled vehicles, cuneiform script, and the first written records. So we have a collective community life. We have specializations in labor and social classes with different trainings and various levels of authority. We have found various forms of art there, like unblinking votives that are standing in for people praying, because as you're farming and working, you can't pray all day. So you have these wild staring eyes of these votives praying for you. Probably in their ziggurats, these are centers of town, administrative centers, religious centers. We have found things like in the tombs of Ur, the standard of Ur, which is a double-sided wooded box in a mosaic medium with small pieces of glass and stone embedded in wet cement. We have found musical instruments as well. In the royal standard, we are looking at a mosaic, a funeral probably. It has been dubbed War and Peace in the subject matter, representing possibly a military campaign and scenes from a banquet. Again, we're here looking at an early musical instrument, a stringed instrument, a lyre, and it has mythological characters on it that are also part human, part animal, like we saw in the Paleolithic era. We have found them to have ancient religions that is somewhat like animism, where the world is inhabited by living spirits, and they are explaining how the world works by myths, and they are fabricating these myths into the workings of everyday life. The gods might be vengeful, they might be beautiful or fickle or reliable or ugly. They become families of superhumans, gods and goddesses that resemble humans. They are immortal, but they also want human beings to worship them with ritual sacrifice and prayer. The gods here are polytheistic. There are multiple kinds of gods. We find cosmologies that show creation stories, like in the Babylonian creation from 2000 BC, where the universe was made by a spontaneous generation, and that the gods unfold where there was chaos, and from the chaos and the primeval waters come Marduk, a hero god, the offspring of wisdom, and he destroys the great mother god, bringing a new order. Probably what we're seeing here is the old religion of shamanism being replaced by a more warrior-centric society. The gods and goddesses are probably worshipped in places like ziggurats. In Gilgamesh, here we have the first, in Inanna, we have the first Gada, where there are written records from the land of Sumer. She's the goddess of fertility, love, sex, and procreation, of life, death, war, and rebirth. She's associated with rain and storms, with the planet Venus. and also will be similar to the Roman and Greek goddess of Aphrodite and Venus. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we get the first major literary epic around 2300 BC. It's a long poem, and we are getting probably a poem that was recorded orally for centuries. The hero is a semi-historical figure who probably ruled the Sumerian city of Uruk around 2800 BC. This is written 500 years later. He's described as two-thirds God, one-third men. He is blessed by the gods with beauty and courage, but he spurns the affection of Ishtar, a fertility goddess that is similar to the Egyptian goddess Isis. He's punished with the loss of his friend Enkidu. Enkidu is part animal, part man. He undertakes a long and hazardous quest to search for everlasting life. He is encountering a mortal like Noah, who saved humankind from a great and devastating flood. And for the reward for this, he had been granted eternal life. But mostly what we find is this. We find that there is no permanence. There is no permanence, and eventually everything must die. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is important not only as the first poem, but also it tries to deal with death and non-being. Yeah, here we go. Here's cuneiform. So this is what the first writing cuneiform would look like. It is writing made from a triangular wedge and put together to form former pictographic forms that can be read. And so the Epic of Gilgamesh would have been written on clay tablets like this. And we have found pieces of the story in various places that have generally pieced together the entirety of what we know about Gilgamesh. In the Akkadian Empire, we have a threat to Sumer that ultimately the Akkadian or the Assyrian people are going to take the city-states and unite them under their command. We are seeing an image on the left of Sargon of Akkad, and he is going to dominate Mesopotamian history for a while until, again, it's going to turn over. And partly because of all the turnover is because of where they're at. So we don't have any mountains or deserts here. So it's easy for an army to travel from one place to another, and depending on the weapons that they have, or the amount of people that they have, or the fierceness or cleverness that they have in their leaders, they can take the area over. In Babylon, after around 2000 BC, we have the Babylonian Empire, and we find here the stelae, a code called Hammurabi's Code. And Hammurabi's Code, which was made in 1750 BCE, is a collection of 282 clauses engraved on a 7-foot stele that looks like an index finger being held up. Here we are looking at laws about how to behave, how punishments are doled out, and also how do we deal with inheritance, with wealth from families. And it also is showing us that law is going to be distributed evenly. So when law is written down, now you know that everybody is going to be treated in the same manner. Some of the codes include this. If a man has been taken prisoner and there is no food in his house, and his wife enters the house of another, then that woman bears no blame. If a man has destroyed the eye of a free man, his own eye shall be destroyed. If he has destroyed the eye of a plebeian or broken the bone of a plebeian, he shall pay 1 mina of silver, approximately 1 pound of silver. If he destroys the eye of a man's slave or broken the bone of a man's slave, he shall pay half of its value. In the Iron Age, So in Asia Minor, where Turkey is, the Hittites are tribal nomads who built an empire that lasts until 1200 BCE. They are using iron tools. It is cheaper to produce, more durable than bronze. Bronze is hard to make because the copper and tin don't exist in any single country, so you have to trade to make bronze. Iron ore is everywhere. All you got to do is mine it and melt it, and you have stronger weapons, and it's cheaper to produce, and it's making superior technology, including horse-drawn warrior chariots. And these iron-wheeled chariots are making for better weapons. So the Hittites will last for a little while with their empire. The Assyrians will follow them. We will also see the Persians conquering vast portions of Mesopotamia as well. Under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar, the Neo-Babylonians and the Babylonians are going to build a tower that is known as the Ishtar Gate. From the Neo-Babylonians and from the Assyrian Empire, we are getting also more mythological characters at the gates here, like we're seeing from the human heads and the bodies of the animals that are winged. These would be lining coming into a city, like, say, a city like the Ishtar Gate that you might find in Babylon, possibly. By 1500, you have the Phoenicians, a energetic seafaring people from present-day Lebanon, who are developing a non-pictographic alphabet with 22 signs. Here's the Ishtar Gate here from Neo-Babylon, a double gate. Again, this gate that would lead into the city and have symbols of who the people are, who their gods are, and also how to behave within the city. In the Persian Empire, the Persians have a ceremonial center in Persepolis. They have an elaborate palace built with carved stone. They built a vast network of roads. They have about 1,600 miles of terrain. They have a postal system, and they have fresh horses at each one of those postal outlets every 14 miles. They have also devised a type of monotheistic religion called Zoroastrianism. This is from the prophet Zoroaster. He is also known as Zarathustra, and he sees the universe as a product of two warring forces, good and evil. Good is associated with light and with a place of ultimate reward known as paradise, opposed evil and darkness, and evil and darkness is represented by a powerful satanic spirit. So their freedom to make choices, human beings take part in a cosmic struggle. Their choices determine their fate at the end of time. Zoroastrian beliefs include the anticipation of last judgment and resurrection, and would come to influence the evolution of later world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which do not exist now but will exist later. In Egypt, in northern Africa. So in northern Africa, Neolithic villages were united under the authority of Narmer, the Egypt's first monarch. I don't know if I have the palette of Narmer here. No. In our textbook on page 17, they talk about the palette of Narmer. That is a cosmetics stone slate that shows us how Narmer defeats his enemies and unifies ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt, we have pharaohs who are running Egypt. The pharaohs are part God, and Here we're looking at the funerary mask of Tutankhamun. In Tutankhamun, we are seeing the images of the serpent and also of the cobra and the vulture that signify the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. It is pounded in gold. It's a death mask that was in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And we know a lot about the Egyptians from their tombs. Egypt, the lifeblood of Egypt is the Nile. Surrounding Egypt is desert. But the Nile, which floods out of the mountains in Upper Egypt and then goes to the Mediterranean, lower Egypt in the delta, the overflowing of the water brings a rich black dirt that is really good for farming. And the stability of how the flood happens every spring and the farming land that is keeping the Egyptian people alive, and also being surrounded by desert, what makes it very hard to invade, allows this civilization to stay fairly stable for several thousand years. In the gods of ancient Egypt, we have a self-generating sun god that is the sun god of Ra. Ra is pulling the sun on a chariot that he takes. The sun god has a symbol generally of the bird head of a falcon and has a royal staff. And at some point, Ra goes senile. And when Ra goes senile, Osiris takes over the world. But his brother Set is jealous of Osiris and kills him and chops up his body and throws him into the Nile. His wife Isis, the queen of heaven, gathers the fragments of Osiris and puts him back together. However, she does not find his penis, and he is not able to regenerate as a man, and with his blue skin, he will lord in the world of death, in the underworld. Osiris and Isis will produce a son, Horus. Horus, who has the body of a man and the head of a falcon, is the first pharaoh. And all the other human pharaohs, like King Tutankhamun, they are blood relationships to the gods who then created this human, who then set in force the Egyptian world. There is a cult of theocracy here, where the ruler is God. We see this ruler is God in things like the Great Sphinx, that we believe is the Pharaoh Khafre near the Great Pyramids. The Great Pyramids of Giza were massive pyramids that were burials of great rulers about nearly 5,000 years ago, of Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, which is the lower pyramid. The pyramids, we're not 100% sure exactly everything about them in terms of what they do, but we know that they were cut with copper saws and chisels, and they were pulling stones up huge heights, and the largest of the height being 481 feet. These are massive stones that were cut and looted thousands of years ago. So it's not like the King Tut tomb, where we found his tomb that had been forgotten about and buried and basically was untouched. King Tut's tomb really gives us a real window into the Egyptian world. There were priests, and in these priests, the priests had created elaborate papyrus scrolls with their writing form of hieroglyphs that teach you how to get into the afterlife, where you are greeted by Horus. Anubis, who is a head of a jackal and body of a man, will weigh your heart to see if you have done good in the world. And you figure out how to get into this afterlife from the tombs that have hieroglyphs in the ceilings and in the walls, that are stories that lead you into the land of the dead. From their art, we see how pharaohic art looks. We see here how the queen is relating to her husband in Menkaure and Khemernabti. We see pharaohic art where one foot is in front of the other, the hands at the side, wearing the royal beard and the royal headdress. Notice the anatomies are maybe not 100% totally accurate. They are merely inscribed. In this painting, we are seeing a scene that is done as a wall painting that was painted on dry plaster. So we're looking at the typical way that the paintings look, where they are frontal. You see the side of view of the legs here, and then the body is front at us, and then the side view of a head. And here we are looking at figures with cats and birds and fish and butterflies that are based on pretty close observation and show a naturalistic world of observation. In Egyptian literature and papyruses, most of the literature is about how to get into the afterlife. Egyptian women are typically involved in the inheritance. So when it comes to inheritance, typically inheritance is coming through women rather than men. The religion changes briefly from Akhenaten. Akhenaten changes the worship of the other gods into a brief monotheistic. So rather than polytheistic, like we had been seeing in Mesopotamia and we had been seeing in Egypt up till now, we get, like Zoroastrianism, we are seeing a brief Akhenaten religion where they are worshiping Aten. They are worshiping the sun. Remember, before, Ra was pulling the sun. They were not worshiping the sun itself. So there was a short period here from Akhenaten where we get a new kingdom with a maybe more relaxed pharaohic art where the pharaoh is playing with his children here. And this religion is going to be brief before it returns back to the old religion, but there is a different kind of thing happening there. In literature, we know that there are stories, and some of these stories tell us things like the satire of trades, which is telling you all the different kind of ways in which you can make money. In the teaching of Kete, we have a father taking his son to school to become a scribe. Being a scribe was a form of a professional kind of occupation where you weren't a laborer. Instead, you worked for wealthy people or priests or pharaohs, and you did math, or you wrote down history, or you wrote laws, or you wrote down what these people said, and then you then would etch these things into papyrus scrolls, perhaps even put them into architecture for architectural settings and stories. And in the teaching of Kete, his son did not want to go to scribe school, and along the way they see all the different occupations you can do, like how when you make wine and you have to stamp on grapes, how your feet become stained, or that when you're a stone carver, your fingers get gnarled from the heavy labor. And by the time that Kete's son gets to his school, he realizes being a scribe means you can live a pretty nice life and you don't physically decay from that hard labor that you're doing. We know a lot about the ancient Egyptians from their writing, which is a language that became disused about 3,000 years ago, but then a couple hundred years ago, they found this Rosetta Stone that had the Egyptian hieroglyphs in it, And then another Egyptian use in writing called Demotic. This is in my other lecture on the development of writing, by the way. And then we see that it's a translation stone between them and Greek. And since we knew Greek, we were able to translate and figure out all the hieroglyphs that we have seen here, all the pictorial writing that is in the papyrus scrolls, that are in the tombs. We have translated all of it, which is remarkable, that a language that was dead for 2,000 years is now completely understandable, and we know a lot about the Egyptians because of this. Our textbook goes on to talk about, briefly, very briefly, it talks about the Nak terracottas, that in East Africa civilizations, again, that mostly are practicing animism, that we will be studying more in a lecture that I will be putting on in Sub-Saharan Art around chapter 6 and also in chapter 9. We see their terracotta work here, their earthen work done around probably somewhere between 500 BC and 200 BC. We see the kind of geometric qualities, the kind of coiling that these Africans in Western Sudan would have been doing. In America, we see the stone sculptures of the great Olmec heads. We know also of great societies that were in Peru that we know almost nothing about, but we have discovered them recently. Mound building and things like that going on in La Venta from the Olmecs. We'll be studying them also in chapter 9. In Native American culture, we know quite a bit because Native Americans have kept a lot of their history alive and their working oral histories and their traditions. From the Zuni people, a Pueblo people in New Mexico, we see kachinas. Kachinas are spirits, and these spirits can be inhabited in these dolls that they make, which are likenesses of these kachinas. And the spirits in these dolls we think are very similar to the Venus of Willendorf that we studied a little bit earlier, again inscribing that perhaps these shamanistic practices are still alive, and we are doing similar processes that we did in the Paleolithic era as well. We study the last 4 pages of our chapter. We briefly look at ancient India. And we start in the Indus Valley civilization. One of the earliest civilizations from the Bronze Age is a picture that we're looking at here, Mohenjo-Daro, with wide streets, fire-bricked houses, grid patterns, bathing facilities, and sewage systems that probably were far, far advanced compared to other places in the world. We see art in the Indus Valley of yogis, and more than likely Hindu gods like Shiva, the Lord of the Beast, probably here. From the Vedic traditions, we have a caste system, and this caste system is set up for a sociological division that is very rigid, and there are 4 principal castes: priests and scholars, rulers and warriors, artisans and merchants, and then unskilled workers. You are not allowed to shift in your caste, and you are supposed to live in such a way as to do the best that you can within your caste system. From Hinduism, one of the earliest religions, we have pantheism, a belief that divinity is inherent in all things, and Hinduism is embracing Vedic gods who take on countless different forms. The forms that we find might include Brahma, the creator of the universe, and Vishnu, who is the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer and transformer god. From the Bhagavad Gita, we have a story about the struggle of being good, even though at times you have to go to war. And this takes place on a battlefield where we find that there is a war within that we have to deal with. and that we have to deal as a warrior with dharma. And in dharma, we have to act correctly. Let me see here. So dharma and karma. So dharma is in your caste doing the right actions. And when you do the right actions, you receive karma. So karma is related as a kind of cosmic tally book. It means that if you do the right things, you will be rewarded for it. In Brahman and in the Atman, these are in the Upanishads in the Hindu religion, Brahman is the infinite, formless, ultimately unknowable God. Brahman is the absolute spirit and the uncaused cause, the ultimate reality. And in every human being, there is a little bit of the Brahman, the Atman. And the Atman is the soundless, formless, intangible, undying, tasteless, odorless, without beginning, without end, eternal, immutable, beyond nature part of a human being. And your Atman is in a material prison of the human body. So the Atman, the self, seeks to be one again with the absolute spirit, with Brahman. And you do this you are trying to get rid of your body, and through reincarnation, by getting karma, by committing good actions in your dharma, you will be relieved when you die of your body, hopefully, and eventually have your Atman reunited with Brahman. So you're trying to purify yourself to attain a kind of regeneration and become pure again. And you're trying to get to an ultimate nirvana in doing so. Briefly, in ancient China. So ancient China, we see the development of civilization along the Yellow and Yangtze River as early as 3500 BC. The Neolithic villages in China are producing silk. And the silk, which is spun by a type of spider, are going to create wonderful fabrics and clothes that are going to bring wealth and fame to Chinese culture. They are working in metallurgy and writing. They are, by 1750, they have developed calligraphic script, and that this calligraphic script has about 5,000 characters, 4,500 characters, which are still used today, using pictographic and phonetic elements. The earliest warrior tribe, the Shangs, the Shang dynasty between 1520 and 1027, are hereditary kings who are regarded as intermediates between the people and the spirit world. They have powerful bureaucracy, huge armies of archer warriors, and the soldiers are consisting of peasants who in peacetime are farming the land with the assistance of slaves captured in war. Also in China, we have the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven from the Zhou dynasty. We also find the I Ching in there, which is used for divination. In the Mandate of Heaven from the Zhou dynasty, in the Mandate of Heaven, it says that political authority requires obedience and established moral law, and this will create a natural order. But also, if the kings, the Shang kings, who failed ultimately to achieve the order and to respect the people, anytime that happens, there will be a change of the dynasty, which is how we go from the Shang to the Zhou. So about every 200 to 350 years, there will be, from the Mandate of Heaven, a turning over of the dynasty. In spirits and gods, what we find in China is an assortment of local spirits and natural forces that relate to rivers and mountains and crops. In the Chu people in southern China, we find that they have very shamanistic qualities that are very similar to other shamanistic qualities that we would find in our studies. And then ancestor worship. So in ancestor worship, your ancestors are mediators. They are the mediators between heaven and God, and heaven and earth. I mean, and the ancestors have direct influence on your own affairs. So you must always respect and memorialize the dead. And that's why you might see altars with fruit and incense and candles, remembering the dead, because if you don't remember them and honor them, they will not work on your behalf in the spiritual world, and bad things might happen to you. One of the great things that we find is one of the oldest texts in the Book of Changes. So in the Book of Changes, we have the I Ching. It's a direct way to interpret the operations of the universe. This originates in the Shang dynasty, but it's not until the 6th century BCE do we get the cryptic symbols and commentaries which diviners are used to predict the future. Order is derived from balance between the 4 seasons, the 5 elements, wood, earth, fire, earth, metal, and water, and the 5 powers of creation, cold, heat, dryness, moisture, and wind. And this is a holistic viewpoint that is the key, or the chi, which is the substance of the universe and the vital energy in the human body. And that's what acupuncturists and various Chinese healers use to heal you with. In medical science, it's a combination of the pulmonary system, the electricity in the body, the circulatory system, and something a little bit undefinable like the Atman, that is the chi, that substance, that energy within us that can make us sick but can also heal us. The last thing that our chapter talks about is Taoism. So Taoism is the philosophy of the way. So in Taoism, they are embracing the natural principle of that there is a harmony in all things, and that those who live in total simplicity and harmony with nature can be at one with the Tao. So the Tao is the way. When you find the way, you live in nature, you resist the intellectual, and you try to find your place in life, and when you find it, you will flow in life like a river effortlessly. So that is a very comprehensive lecture on our first chapter. And again, you will, in that chapter, this is the supplemental lecture that I was talking about, the development of writing. I won't go into it. I'll allow you to check that out. From the chapter, you will then take an assessment. So how many different ways did we see ancients relating to the dead? I just talked about it in China, for example. How do the gods relate to the human world? We saw that in Mesopotamia. We've seen that in Egypt. What belief systems are they forming? How are they relating to their beliefs in terms of how the world works, how the world was formed, how order should be kept? In the early types of religions, we saw several of them. And remember that the early religions would not be modern religions that are influenced, like Islam and Christianity and Judaism. We are looking at things like early monotheistic religions like Zoroastrianism. We are looking at polytheistic religions like we saw in Mesopotamia. Those are the types of things that I want you to answer, as I'm asking you very general questions that will allow you to pick parts of the chapter that you want to write about. But again, write about them and give me specific examples from the textbook. We are also going to have a discussion. And the topic of the discussion, I have questions for you. Number your responses. Why is a half-man, half-animal motif so common in the ancient world? Why are gods and goddesses often associated with animals? And when we look at the Paleolithic cave artists, why do they spend so much time painting animals? And why do you think that they were painting there? And to help you go through this, I have an article that is describing why one might relate to animals. Whoops. Here, where I found an article from cognitive science, cognitive psychology, that talks about that one of the reasons we might see animals is because we're hardwired in our eyes to do so. So to prepare for this, you should review the lecture I'm going to go over. That is about kind of art and type of magic. You should take a look at shamanistic videos that I'm showing you. And I think you want to look at some of the video here from Genevieve von Pritzinger from a TED Talk. So let me kind of get started and show you some of the stuff you're going to see. Now, a lot of this I have really already kind of given you and gone over already. So the Paleolithic world I talked about. I also give you a short section here that we are not the only human beings to make art. We also believe that Neanderthals, who are no longer on the earth, only Homo sapiens survive now, we believe that they also made art too, and they also went into caves, broke rocks, made stone circles as well. The cave paintings, as I was talking about, in the caves were done in darkness. They were probably done on hallucinogens. They were almost always of animals. And then we see sometimes, if you imagine being the cave here, notice that they drew the ram in with the horn, but they didn't draw the underbelly and the front leg. But look at how the rock formation, if you moved a torch, a flame through this darkness, the shadows would move. And when the shadows move, it might look like this animal is moving. And you see that also with how the head here was formed by the rock. One of the great caves that I want you to go into is in Chevi. Chevi, we're going to find lots of art. And I found a wonderful website called Don's Maps. And in Don's Maps, you can see all of the art in Chevi. The finger fluting to make the owl. How they're using burnt wood and charcoal, how they're rubbing off the cave wall to get the calcite off, to get to the white rock, and that white rock is standing out against the black charcoal, as we see an assemblage of lions hunting a bunch of other animals, all of these animals that have been extinct for 20,000 years. This cave was used to make art from 30,000 years ago to 20,000 years ago. Artwork was sometimes finished by other artists hundreds of years later. Lascaux was in our textbook. We have a picture of the Hall of Bulls. This is art that was done only 17,000 years ago. So Chevi is twice as old as the art that we find in Lascaux. I talked about the Venus of Willendorf. I talked about shamanism. I showed you how that kind of shamanism exists today in culture as well. One of the things that I wanted you to go to, that I link you to, is Don's Maps. Don's Maps is a listing of cave art throughout the entire world. I think it is the greatest website for studying cave art you can find. I spent several years on this website. It shows you where Chevi is in France with a number of different maps. It shows you where the entrance was that was discovered in 1994 and how cave explorers repelled into this cave that was sealed 20,000 years ago, and proceeds to show you all of the art. And the art is extensive. Cave bears, cave lions, woolly rhinoceros. And again, not only just done in charcoal, but extensive using your fingers in the soft calcite on the walls. At the end of this cave, Don shows us the types of animal bones that were found there also. In the end of the cave, let me see if I can find it here. Ah, here we are. Okay. In the end of the cave, we find that great mural that I talked about. So in this mural, here are the cave lions, male lions with no manes. And we're finding woolly mammoth. We're finding woolly rhinoceros. Find other cave lions at the other end, all facing the same direction. Woolly rhinoceros with numbers of horns describing motion, 3 legs on the back leg here of this cow, the auroch also describing motion. It is an incredible work of art for being as old as it is. And it shows that these people were very much like us. Also in this cave is the pendant. And here we're seeing the head of a cave lion, but we're seeing the genitalia of a human woman. And we're also seeing the head of a buffalo here, but the buffalo is standing up like a man, half human, half animal. This is the only human image in the entire cave. The rest of the cave is all geometric symbols and animals. I'd like you to go through Shavi. So I give you a link to Shavi here. You can go to an interactive version of Shavi in Google Arts and Culture. You can look at a different video of shaman dancing. Or to understand the idea of the half human, half animal motif even better, here is a recent video of a Native American doing an eagle dance. Again, notice the beginnings of music here. The drums, the voice, the rattles. And again, the human becoming animal, mimicking animal motions, taking the animal spirit inside of them, or bringing that animal spirit that is inside out as well. The last thing that I would like you to look at is The Roots of Religion here by Guinevere von Pritzinger. And she is going to show us how these ancient people are us. And the things that we know that make them like us are burials with elaborate grave goods, impossible entities, identification with magical and spiritual themes in art. So the art we believe has a purpose rather than just being art. Let me show you just little bits and pieces of this, but I'd like you to watch the whole thing.
Let's go back to this idea of religion and spirituality, and how would we get that in the archaeological record? Because of course, if you think about that far back, basically we're working with stone tools. So there's not really much to go with. And so how do we start trying to move beyond that and actually take real, and it's an absolutely fascinating one. This is actually one of 3 burials from this site. This particular one is the adult male, and it's about 28,000 years old. It's from Russia. And if you'll notice, there's little white things all over his skeleton there. Those are ivory beads. There are approximately 3,500 ivory beads in this burial. A archaeologist in our field by the name of Randy White actually went to the effort of trying to, what we call experimental archaeology, and he actually took the mammoth ivory and practiced until he could actually get quite good at making the beads. And even when he was good at it, it took an hour per bead. Do the math on that.
So why are we spending so much time making things that we then bury away?
This one is a wonderful classic example. This is a ivory carved figurine. It's probably about this tall. Head of a lion, body of a human. Again, coming back to that doesn't exist anywhere in nature. So what's going on? Why are they depicting this? This is not a self-representation. And there's people in my field who have made the proposal that maybe this could be some sort of mythology, something to do with origin stories and things like that. And so there's these interesting examples that exist throughout the archaeological record. That particular one is about 32,000 years old. What about hunting magic? So what I mean when I say hunting magic is this is from the cave called Neo in France, and you've got a bison that's painted on a cave wall, and if you notice, it looks like there's almost some sort of spear sticking out of its side. So in this case, what people have proposed is that what we could be seeing is them almost trying to kill the animal ritually in the cave first in order to ensure success when they go out on the hunt of a human.
And then here is
a great example here of an impossible entity, which has also been potentially identified as being a shaman. Now, the reason why they say that is the idea that what if they were wearing a mask? What if this, rather than being an impossible entity, is an actual depiction of a human partially dressed up like an animal. So you can see the leg.
Okay. So you're kind of getting an idea of the subject here and what I want you to study to be able to thoughtfully and intelligently answer these questions here that are asking you to consume the material, internalize the material, and then once you've internalized the material, you can then thoughtfully kind of begin to answer, well, why do these things exist that we keep seeing? Why are we so interested in the relationship between animals and humans? Why are there so many half animal, half human, so many paintings, so many sculptures that we have seen in this lecture? Why does that goes on not only in the Paleolithic world, but in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age as well? Why do we continue to do that? What is all of that? Think about this in relationship to, again, the Marvel Universe. The idea that you can fly, the idea that you have superhuman strength. Imagine being a human and watching these very powerful animals hunt and considering, what if my intellect was in the body of an eagle? What if my intellect was in the body of a lion? And what you would have is something that was the best of the human and the human intellect, but also very powerful as well. Those mythologies still exist today, and we consume them all the time. So that's what I would like you to do for your your assignment. I would like you to do a reading assessment, and then I would like for you to do a discussion, comment on another student's post for a point, answer the questions for 4 points, and I look forward to seeing what you wrote, and I look forward to responding with some of my observations as well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.